Hi there, it's Jennifer. I hope you're having a good day. Now, watercolor is still very popular in card making. I don't know about you, but I sometimes struggle with getting cool effects in watercolor backgrounds. I like what other people do, but sometimes I have a hard time achieving it myself. So I'm always looking for tips or techniques that give great results without much effort. And that's what today's technique is. It's adding salt to watercolor. Now, this technique is nothing new. This has been around in the artist world forever. And actually, Jennifer Raza shared it in the Watercolor for Card Makers class that we have over on Online Card Classes, which I'll link to. But I really wanted to give you a quick introduction to the technique today. Okay, so for this technique, you need salt. Now, I just encourage you to go into your kitchen and use whatever salt you have. Here I have kosher salt, and it's got pretty big crystals here. And I'm going to put some into a tiny little jar that I happen to have. You can do this in a little bowl or on your paper if you wanted to. Now, this is another type of salt. It's bigger crystals, much bigger. My mother-in-law sent this from Hawaii. I'll show you the label here. There's lots of different salts out there, and based on how big the crystals are or what type of salt you use, you can get different effects. I'm mixing a few here. Now, here's my variation on this technique. You don't need to do this part. I'm taking Perfect Pearls because I've been using them a lot lately. I don't know why. It's just a pigment powder. I'm putting a little bit in there with the salt. So what I'm going to do is basically coat the salt with the Perfect Pearls. So when we get our technique, you'll get the really cool effects of the salt mixing with the watercolor, but you'll also get a pearly shine with it. So again, you can totally skip the Perfect Pearl. This is just a fun variation on an older technique. I'm going to share two different backgrounds that I created with this technique, a little bit different between the two. Let's do the first one that has some pearly shine on it. I have some Tim Holtz watercolor paper and some watercolor. Now, you could use any watercolor paper and any watercolor you may have. You could even mix inks with water, whatever you would like to try. Different watercolors give different effects, so I encourage you to try whatever you have. I'm just totally randomly mixing some blues and purples on my paper. You can see I go off to the right to pick up some water and then add more color. Now for this example, I'm going to put a lot of water on this paper, so you can see me dropping more water onto it. So this paper is very saturated, and there's actually some water kind of pooled up on the surface. So for this example, I'm using a lot of water. Now I'm taking the salt mixture that we made with some Perfect Pearls on it, and I'm just kind of sprinkling it onto our wet surface. Now this is very wet. I didn't let it dry at all, and I'm going to let this sit for a while. Now you get different results depending on how much water you use, how much you let it dry before you put the salt on, or how wet it is. It just completely depends, and I encourage you just to play around with it. All the backgrounds would turn out fun. You can make a bunch of cards, but in this particular example, I went with very wet watercolor, and I put the salt in right away. So you can see that color pooling up there. That's how much moisture I have on here. Now I am going to set this aside. It kills me to leave it, but I'm going to set this aside and come back to it later. While we wait for that background to dry, I'm going to do a second one here. This is kind of the same thing, but it's a little more intense, a little more variation. Starting the same way, I have watercolor paper, and I'm putting a mix of blue and purple watercolor on it. Now the difference this time is I'm going to allow the watercolor to dry a little bit before I add the salt. Believe it or not, if you allow it to dry a little bit before you add the salt, it intensifies the effect that you get. Okay, so now that I've put down all of my color, you can see that it's pretty wet there in the corners. I'm going to take my heat gun and just dry it a little bit. Just kind of get things drying and absorbing into the paper before we add our salt. Okay, so I made another salt mixture here. This time I used a little less Perfect Pearls, so this example will have a little bit less shine. But I'm tapping it onto my surface as I did earlier. Remember, this isn't nearly as wet as our first example, so not much is happening at first. It is wet, but it's not like pooling up with water or color on top. This time I'm also going to use a little bit of table salt. These are tiny little crystals, and believe it or not, these tiny little crystals make really cool effects in the background. So I'm just sprinkling a little bit of it here and there. Now again, this is going to look terrible at first. I promise you'll want to throw it away. Here's how bad it looks, but it really does give cool effects if you just let it go and walk away. Okay, so now I've let both of them dry. The example on the left is the first one we did, where we did lots of water and lots of the Perfect Pearls on our salt. And you can see kind of the galaxy look you get with lots of shine. Now this example here to the right is the one where we used less water when we added the salt. We dried it a little bit first, and we also added some table salt. I'm using the side of my acrylic block to kind of scratch away some of that salt because it was really stuck there. But you can see the really cool effects you get on this when you use less water and when you use the table salt. So you can get different looks. I really encourage you to play around with this, experiment with different salts and different watercolors and different amounts of water. In showing close up, this is the first example where we used more water and perfect pearls. And here's the second example where we used less water and less perfect pearls. Again, you could totally skip the perfect pearl if you wanted to. Okay, so now I'm going to finish up these cards. I took a little bit of Distress ink in the Chip Sapphire and just rubbed it on the edge of these just to give it a nice defined edge. I think whenever you trim down a watercolor piece, this is a great way to kind of give it a finished look. Next, we can do a little bit of stamping here. I wanted to show you the stamp sets where I got these images from. They're all from a new release from W+9. This one is called Going Places. I used the little bunny and the clouds from the set. I really like these little animals because you can put them kind of peeking over something or holding something up. There are coordinating dies available, and it actually cuts out their little arm for you too, but I didn't use the coordinating dies. I just fussy cut today. It's an absolute adorable stamp set, and I think you'll be seeing a lot of things on the internet of people using that one. Another one, I actually just used the moon in this set, but I wanted to show it to you. It's called Wishing You. It has lots of great bunny images, along with some wonderful sentiments. I wish I could be there. I made a wish and you came true. A lot of good things for different occasions. The sentiment that I'm using is from this stamp set that has lots of great sentiments in it. I used as far as I'm concerned, you hung the moon and all the stars too, but there are also other sentiments of wishing that I think would team up with a lot of birthday cards, a lot of thinking of you cards, and a lot of miss you cards. On both of these cards, I decided to white heat emboss the message directly on our background. However, if I went ahead and just stamped it and put on white powder, that white powder would stick to that background. So I'm taking my anti-static powder tool and just brushing the area where I plan to heat emboss. If you don't have an anti-static powder tool, you can also use a dryer sheet, but I really think that tool is worth the investment. So I stamped the sentiment with Versamark ink, and I'm adding some Hero Arts white embossing powder. You can see where I didn't put the powder tool, all that embossing powder is sticking, so I had to wipe that away. Then I'll go ahead and heat set this, and once it's cooled down, I can buff away any of that extra powder that was left behind from the anti-static powder tool. There's just something really fun about a bright white sentiment on a dark, colorful background. Okay, so now it's time for all of our little stamped images. Again, I fussy cut all of these. You could have used the coordinating dies that are available from W+9. I just really like the look of a stamped image cut right up to the edge. So I stamped all of these on Neenah white cardstock. Any white cardstock works, and I used Hero Arts black dye ink. That's my favorite dye ink when I'm going to do any kind of inking or watercolor. It just will not bleed. And I wanted to do some super fast coloring. I'll be honest, I was running out of time here. My daughter was about to get up from her nap. My son was coming home from his friend's house. I had to hurry. So instead of using Copic markers or watercolor or anything else, I'm using Distress ink. This is the fastest way to color. I'm just using a little bit of hickory smoke with the inking tool and rubbing that color on the edge of this bunny. So I have a soft gray bunny, very white and bright on his belly and face. Then I'm coming in with this Fantastics. This is like a tool that's good for adding ink in little areas. It's kind of got a spongy tip, but it has a nice point to it. I'm using that to add a little bit of worn lipstick to the ears, the nose, and the cheeks of my bunny. And that's all the coloring I'm doing, not taking much time at all. For the clouds, I always like to use tumbled glass Distress ink, add a little bit of that to the edges. Now you could do more bold color with the Distress inks, color the whole thing, and then do a darker color on the outside, but I wanted a really soft look for today's card. Now for the moon, I used a little bit of wild honey. Okay, so now I have all my pieces. It's time to add these onto the card. So these little bunnies, this little bunny or these little animals from this W+9 set are designed to kind of tuck behind something like the edge of a piece of cardstock or a balloon. I'm tucking it behind this little cloud. I took a little bit of micropore tape to tape him in place so that it was easier to assemble the card. Now you could use any kind of Scotch tape or just glue them together if you wanted to. So now that they're connected, I'm going to put some glue on the back of this and add it to the background piece here. You could use foam dots for this, but I decided I needed to save that time, so I'm just gluing it right flat down onto our little backgrounds. I also glued my moon down, and I wanted to connect the moon to the bunny's paw by a string because it says that they hung the moon. So I took some silver string, I tied a knot in the bottom of it. I'm trimming off the excess. And I'm going to glue that knot onto the top of our moon with just a tiny little touch of multi-medium in the matte finish from Ranger. This is a super strong adhesive that dries matte. So I'm putting a little bit under the bunny's paw and a little bit at the top of the moon, and I'll connect them with that string. It's funny, my littlest daughter, who's 3, calls her brother, who's 9, Broman. That's his nickname. And she always says, Broman, you hung the moon, because she thinks he's just the greatest thing since sliced bread. So this card, I'm going to have her give to Colin. Okay, so I'm going to trim off the extra here, and I'll let that dry. It doesn't take long. You can even put an acrylic block on the top to make sure that it doesn't move. But now it looks like the bunny hung the moon. I wanted to add some shine to this, so I have these new sequins from the Ton stamps. I thought these were really fun. They're silver, blue, and iridescent tiny little stars. I'm putting little dots of that multi-medium onto the background. I'm pouring a few of these little sequins down. Now, you may think I'm crazy to add these tiny little sequins one by one to the background, but I use this little quick sticks tool, and it really doesn't take that much time. I put a bunch of dots down with that adhesive, and then I pick up the little sequins with this quick sticks and drop it right onto the adhesive. Another thing you could do is put a bunch of drops of adhesive along the background, throw a bunch of sequins on it, and just let some of them stick. But I am one of those who likes to have a controlled mess. So I'm doing these individually, and it didn't take too long. And check out that fun look that you get. It catches the light, but it's not too overwhelming or busy for that background. Now, one of the things I like to do when I have little critters on my cards, I like to make their eyes really dark and kind of have a little bit of dimension to them. I use this little glaze pen, very inexpensive, and it's great for making eyes very dark and adding just a tiny bit of dimension to them. So we're on the home stretch with these cards. We just need to do the background. I decided to keep that very simple. I have a new die from W+9 that does a starry background. I'll show you what's special about it in a moment. What I like about this background die is it's smaller, so you could do it just in a little area in the center of a card, or you can turn it and do it twice to cover the entire front of a card. So I have a 4¼ by 5½ inch piece of white cardstock. I'm running it through once on the bottom half, and then I'll run it through again on the top half. So what's special about this background die is not only does it die cut little stars, it also embosses little stars. You just run it through like a regular die, but it has these raised stars and cut stars. So you get a lot of dimension on this background, and it's fun for just a simple white background like this one. You could leave all the little die cut stars in place and glue this to your background, but I decided to pop all those little guys out so that I could put this onto a light blue note card and it would show through those stars. So I've trimmed our background down here just to make it the proportions better for the little bunny piece that we created. And I'm gluing this down onto a light blue note card that I cut. Now you can see my card is much too big, so I'm just going to glue it into the top corner, and then I'll just trim off the sides with my trimmer. I'm also adding Wink of Stella, of course, a little bit of shimmer to the moon. I actually put a few coats onto it so it was really shimmery. And then I'm covering that with glossy accents just to intensify it a little bit more. And that's it for these little cards. I hope you enjoyed this technique of adding salt to watercolor. You can really get much more intense looks. Just play around with the types of salts you use and how much water you use. Lots of fun things you can do with it. I really appreciate you all stopping by. It really means a lot to me. If you are interested in these products, the main ones I used are linked below in my YouTube description, or you can go to my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com, where I have everything listed along with much more information. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll see you again soon.